What would justice look like on Earth if we left our biases behind? Welcome back to Philosophy of Ethics. John Rawls is our next deontologist, and he writes his work, A Theory of Justice, with Kant and social contract theory in mind. Knowing some details about those influences is going to be a lot of this video because Rawls is building on both systems. This approach was super popular, and Rawls might be second only to Kant himself for individual philosophical impact. Immanuel Kant is the primary influence of Rawls, and Rawls should not be seen as contrary to Kant, but rather supplementary. Rawls even admits that his view isn't original, and the main difference is mostly in presentation. The next largest influences are from social contract thinkers of the Enlightenment. Each of these have their own particular focus, and Rawls notes that Hobbes has some clear issues with the Kantian interpretation. However, the other two do not need as much generosity to become in line with Kantian thinking. None of these philosophers are in full agreement with Kant. Please don't misunderstand that part, but their style is still focused on similar principles of rationality and will at the political level. So the goal of Rawls is to take Kant and translate him into Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau's style. Their overarching theme is called social contract. There's a lot to say about social contract theory, but this is often not particularly ethical in tone. It usually is just about politics, and ethics is assumed or addressed elsewhere. Socrates seems to get close to social contract theory in the Crito, so this way of understanding justice can be said to go back at least 2,400 years. The general question that social contract is trying to solve is this: how ought all these individuals live together in community when everyone has their own personal interests and desires? There's a few assumptions here. First and foremost is that people are not inherently cooperative. When personal self-interest is detrimental to the whole, you use power, and that power is respected by people who understand the rationale and by those who want the goods of the community and fear the power of going against the common good. Now, personal self-interest is begrudgingly cooperative at the least. Each of the social contract philosophers we have mentioned have their own spin on this, but they more or less agree with these general principles. And to Rawls, this looks a lot like the categorical imperative. Act in such a way that the maximum of your action were to become, through your will, a universal law of nature. In my previous video on Kant, I broke this down into 4 parts. For my purpose in teaching Rawls, we're going to edit this slightly. Run your government as though the maximum of the laws were to become, through the will of the people, universal laws for all. Ultimately, Rawls thinks he can express Kant through social contract. To do so, he uses 2 new tools: the original position and the veil of ignorance. These make more sense if we just jump into a thought experiment. Let's say that one day God gets tired of all our injustice, pauses time, grabs all our little souls, and pulls them into outer space. He then tells us that we are going to collectively agree to the rules that humanity will live by before he shuffles our souls back into random bodies and wipes our memories. Everything has just turned into a giant game of statistics. The odds of you returning to Earth and having access to YouTube is only about 50% because it's banned in China, and there are an additional 2.9 billion people that don't even have access to the internet. That is, unless you change the rules. So, the original position is a starting point where we create the social contract together from our collective rational interests. And the veil of ignorance provides the objective considerations we need to decide and deliberate correctly about justice. We should be able to see Rawls's values at play here in our 3 essential qualities of deontology: accountability, freedom, and a dispassionate approach to morality. A quick note: the function of the veil of ignorance is essentially to get rid of heteronomous influence. This is filling in for the function of Kant. A poor man might think of finding a wallet with money in it as a stroke of good luck, but the person that lost it would look at this as bad luck. Luck isn't a moral principle, it's a chaotic outside force, and we'd never agree to let morality be ruled by luck in the original position. When we're in the original position, what principles would we endorse to create justice? Rawls thinks there are 2 principles of justice: the greatest equal liberty principle and the difference principle. The difference principle will have 2 parts, and we'll get to that in a moment. The greatest equal liberty principle is easy. It means exactly what it says. Everyone deserves equal rights and liberties. The thought experiment assumes this principle. There is literally no basis to differentiate, and that's the reason for maintaining it as the primary principle in the future. There is a long list of freedoms that he thinks this entails, but I don't think this one takes as much explaining to an American audience. In this, he's not different than the majority of deontologist philosophers. This is full fledged egalitarianism. The difference principle is the fun one. The first thing that must be understood is that social inequality is not inherently wrong, but it does need to be justified. Unjustified equality is wrong, clearly, but how is some inequality justified? And notably, the answer is not for the sake of the greatest happiness. Rawls says utilitarianism does not take seriously the distinction between persons. Some people are smarter, some people are more ambitious, and that might be something we want to prioritize in society in a fair way. Happiness alone isn't the all-encompassing common denominator for human beings. We'd instead prioritize something similar, but more conducive to the first principle, that we are inherently equal in terms of rights and liberties. This principle has two parts: the greatest benefit of the least advantaged persons and equality of opportunity. Some people will merit more, and that's okay that they benefit from their differences, but the resulting differences ought to help those that most need the help. Yet at the same time, without equal opportunity, the abilities of the advantaged are unfair. This means that the second part has priority over the first. Things like education cannot be restricted for the sake of increasing society's outcomes because we've already established maximum equal liberty. The correct order for Rawls's principles are as follows: greatest equal liberty principle, difference principle B, which is equality of opportunity, and then difference principle A, the greatest benefit of the least advantaged persons. Back to the question at hand, why is any disparity tolerated? Equality of outcome is what is essentially third on Rawls's list. This might be better understood if we ask, is there a benefit to inequality? John Rawls very clearly believes that the answer is yes. Let's dive straight into an example. This guy is Mohammed bin Salman, and he's the leader of Saudi Arabia, the head of the Saud family, and this family is the richest in the world. The family total net worth is around $1.5 trillion, and that goes up as the price of oil goes up. I won't pretend that this is the most moral guy in the world, but Rawls would be very concerned about taking his money, even if we were to just straight up give it to the poor. The world is filled with a delicate supply and demand chain that this guy knows very well, and he's good at navigating this mess. He games it to his own selfish desires, but regardless, the economy as it is currently structured would have major problems if the House of Saud just stopped trading with the world. And this is how Rawls feels about most mega corporations and super rich people. Global poverty has been decreasing over the years, and at the same time, income distribution has been getting better. Rawls's concern is that if we tackle something like wealth disparity directly, we could accidentally regress the situation and send us into an economic recession. Rawls would consider it an injustice if we injure the poor at all, even while attempting to balance the system in the name of justice. If attacking the wealth of the richest Americans ends up accidentally hurting the poorest Americans, we clearly did it wrong. So, instead, wealth disparity is considered justified when that exact disparity is what is contributing to the success of the least advantaged. Disparity isn't correctly justified when that unbalanced distribution is the greatest happiness. And disparity isn't immoral because of maximum happiness, but because of the lack of opportunity that this communicates. Rawls doesn't think that individualistic capitalism is inherently the most moral political system. He's actually quite friendly to a lot of socialist principles. Rawls simply doesn't want to throw out the benefits of capitalism as a tenet of justice. And so other things, the rights and opportunities of individuals, are held as the priority. Rawls still recognizes that this type of situation is mostly achieved by accident and not on merits alone. So, making disparity less accidental by making sure there's equal access to education, for instance, can help close the gap and make for greater justice in the world. Thanks for watching.